Did you get another golden retriever? End quote. No, Ben. Absolutely not. End quote. Sarah's voice was firm now, a hint of steel in it. End quote. I haven't and hashtag 039, gotten another dog since Buster. And I certainly wouldn't put my address on a dog tag if I did. I couldn't go through that again. End quote. Her words hung heavy in the air. Ben knew she was telling the truth. He could hear the pain in her voice, raw and undiminished by time. He had always believed Sarah felt the loss of Buster just as deeply as he did. End quote. Then who put your address on this dog and hashtag 039, tag, end quote, he asked, more to himself than her. End quote. I don't and hashtag 039, no, Ben, end quote, Sarah said, end quote, but I and hashtag 039, look into it. Maybe one of the local shelters or fosters. Maybe they got it mixed up somehow. I and hashtag 039, check with them tomorrow. But, Ben, end quote, she hesitated, end quote, are you sure he's like Buster? Really like him? End quote. End quote, Sarah, he and hashtag 039, identical. It and hashtag 039, it and hashtag 039, eerie, end quote. A flicker of silence. Then be careful, Ben. Things like that just don't happen. They hung up a few minutes later, the conversation leaving Ben more unsettled than before. He looked down at the dog, who was now fast asleep, a picture of innocence. He was certain now. This was no ordinary stray. This was a puzzle, a mystery that he had to solve. He decided to check a few things. He ran a scan of the collar, looking for any microchip or identifying markers. Nothing. The collar was old and worn, it had clearly been used for a long time. He contacted the local animal shelters and rescue groups, describing the dog. No one had reported seeing him. He even did an online search, running the image through every reverse search tool he could find, to no avail. The dog seemed to exist outside of the usual databases. It was nearly dawn when he finally gave up. He took the dog back to his small apartment, a one-bedroom above a noisy pizza place. He laid out an old blanket, the same blanket Buster used to sleep on, for the dog. It immediately curled up on the familiar material, a small sigh escaping its lips. Ben watched the dog sleep for a long time, his mind racing. The resemblance to Buster was too uncanny to be a coincidence. And Sarah and hashtag 039's address on the tag. It was like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that didn't and hashtag 039 fit, a clue that only raised more questions. He had a feeling that this wasn't and hashtag 039 going to be a simple lost dog case. This was something much more profound. Something he felt in his bones, like a deep, unspoken fear. He had to find out the truth, even if it meant dredging up the pain he had worked so hard to bury. He owed it to himself. And he owed it to the Phantom Paw, the silent reminder of the dog that had been ripped away from his life. The road to the past. The next day, Ben went through the motions at work, his focus fractured. The Henderson robbery case felt inconsequential compared to the mystery he was unraveling. He spent his breaks looking at the dog, who he'd started calling Shadow for lack of a better name. Shadow seemed to understand his pain, the gentle tilt of its head a silent comfort. He re-examined the tag. It was more worn than he'd first thought, with small scratches near the edges. He considered whether there may have been a name there at one point, something which had been scratched out to replace it with Sarah's address. He ran an old fingerprint kit over it, but to no avail. The tag had been exposed to the elements for too long to yield anything. He kept his search for the owner quiet, not wanting to draw attention to his personal stake in this case. He decided to take a day off, telling Miller he had a personal matter to attend to. He packed a bag, grabbed a few dog toys from the store and loaded Shadow into his car. He was going to drive to Sarah's town. He needed to see her in person, to look into her eyes, and see if there was anything she was hiding. The drive was long, a monotonous landscape of gray highways and fleeting glimpses of blue sky. Shadow sat quietly beside him, occasionally nudging his hand with its nose as if to say, "It's okay, I'm here now." He found himself talking to the dog, telling it stories of Buster, of his life before the heartache. He realized that in a way, Shadow was helping him to heal, to process the grief he had suppressed for so long. He arrived in Sarah and #039's small town late in the afternoon. It was a quaint place, a far cry from the hustle and bustle of the city. The air felt cleaner, the pace slower. He found Sarah and #039's house, a small, charming cottage with a well-kept garden. He parked down the street and saw her walking in her garden, her hair pulled back in a bun, her shoulders slightly hunched. He could see the weariness etched around her eyes, the same weariness he carried with him. He took a deep breath, grabbed Shadow's lead, and walked up to the gate. Sarah turned, her eyes widening when she saw him. Relief, surprise, and something else flickered across her face. "Ben," she said, her voice a little shaky, "what are you doing here?" "I had to see you," Ben said, gesturing towards Shadow. "I needed to talk to you face to face, and, well, to show you," He unclipped Shadow and #039's lead, and the dog trotted over to Sarah, sniffing her hand hesitantly. Sarah reached down, her fingers gently stroking its head. Ben watched her face, searching for any sign of recognition, of deceit, but all he saw was profound grief, mixed with bewilderment. It and #039's, it and #039's just like him, Ben, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked up at Ben, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't understand. This shouldn't and #039 be happening." Ben knew then, without a shred of doubt, that Sarah had nothing to do with this. The shock, the confusion, it was all genuine. He had been so focused on the mystery, that he hadn't considered how much this would affect her. He explained his findings so far, about the tag, the lack of any history, the eerie resemblance to Buster. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I checked the local shelters and rescue groups," she said, "and no one recognized